1944. This is where our winter offensive stopped. Peaceful-looking hills, aren't they? Something like the hills back home. But the countryside of Cassino has helped the Germans build the toughest barrier we'd hit up to mid-May 1944. By mid-January 1944, we and our allies had cleared the enemy from the mountains east of Cassino and had drawn up to the east side of the Rapido Valley. The allies faced a river, minefields, and barbed wire, all covered by enfilading machine gun fire. The first attempted crossing north of Cassino failed at the riverbank. The Nazis, in this deadly chess game, altered the course of the river, flooding the irrigation ditches, washing out roads, and turning the valley into a swamp. Finally, the tanks used the dry riverbed itself as a route. This attack, with protective cover, carried successfully up to Mount Castellone and Hill 593. The southern attack from San Angelo had already been stopped at the Rapido. Our troops fought their way into town 3 times. A 4th time we stayed. We strained forward to inch up Abbey Hill, from which we could cut Highway 6 and take Cassino from the rear. Whoever dominated the summits of the hills around Cassino dominated the town and the roads leading in and out of it. Enemy observers in the monastery saw our every move the moment we made it. The artillery in the monastery and along the slopes prevented us from reaching the summit, even though we had established positions in the town itself. On February 9th, 75 yards from the Abbey, we were stopped. Here the lines remained for 2 months. The enemy still held the greater part of Cassino and the Monte Cassino Abbey. It became a question of destroying a monument or sacrificing our men. There was actually no question. The troops were withdrawn 1,000 yards. A leaflet was prepared to warn the civilian population to evacuate. Right behind the front lines, they were packed into thin-skinned shells. On impact, the shell would split open. And now, carefully concealed, camouflaged 105 howitzers on gun carriages opened up with a bombardment of warning. "9:28 a.m., February 18th. A-20s were airborne. 226 bombers took part in the attack. Wave after wave of B-25s and later B-17s, B-24s, B-26s planted more than 500 tons of bombs in 4 hours. Between waves, our heavy artillery took up the bombardment. Bombardment, the stalemate still existed. The Germans filtered back into their positions on Mount Cassino, reinforced their strongholds in the town. Over Route 6 and through tunnels from the Ducal Palace, supplies streamed into the Nazi Green Devil Parachute Division, clinging to the amphitheater. The Colosseum, the Ducal Palace, the railroad station, the Hotel des Roses, the Yellow House, the Continental Hotel, Castle Hill, and Hill 165. These points were ordered to resist to the last man. Against the menace of the Nazi heights, we held Mount Trocchio. By Trocchio and on Mount Castellone and all along our line, we placed the most massive concentration of artillery pieces of the Italian campaign. From the smallest mortars and howitzers on the border of no man's land, to 155 long toms and 240 howitzers in the rear, we were ready to begin the third and fiercest attack. The rear of our lines was a beehive of activity. Troops and M4 Shermans moved up, and at every airfield in the Italian theater, planes were being ready to wipe a city off the map. .155 long toms were dragged by M4 prime movers into their positions. The positions were carefully chosen to keep down the chance of detection by enemy air or ground observation. The crews were ready, eager. This was the kind of show they had trained for. training that blended these guns completely with landscape. And at last, the 240 howitzer, emplaced with the help of a crane and a prime mover improvised out of an obsolete Sherman tank. Emplacing one of these giants was a specialist job, and every man of the 32 in this section knew each move he had to make, from establishing the line of fire before the howitzer was mounted to inspecting it after the operations were finished. Finally, additional sound plotting equipment all along the front was installed. With poor visibility, this equipment would be invaluable. The location of each microphone was carefully selected for the best reaction. After that, the line was checked by phone. It checked, so the cylinder was connected and enclosed in a watertight bag. One of the men tested it for sound. It was suspended and finally concealed under a loose layer of dirt. Now, should an enemy gun fire, the microphones would pick up the sound. It would be recorded on film either at a special laboratory or at the command post. The time intervals would be called off to the computer, relayed to the plotting table, and translated into distances. The plotters would then locate the positions of the enemy guns, check them on a terrain map, and phone in the grid numbers to battalion headquarters. And so even if the enemy gun flash were obscured, we'd be able to return his fire within 5 yards of his emplacement. 0830, March 15th. Again, we took to the air. First, the mediums. They came from Sardinia, Corsica, everywhere. The heavies of the Strategic Air Force, B-24s, B-17s. 1,400 tons in 4.5 hours. But nothing was finished. When we stormed what was left of the town, we found that rubble made good concealment for the enemy. Debris made good roadblocks against our tanks. The Nazis' return fire was as strong as ever. We were stopped. But in staff headquarters, new plans of action were on the fire. We will move ahead. We are moving ahead, past Cassino and into the heart of the fortress Europe.